which is kind of fascinating for an animal that evolved with a pretty strict diet of prey, that they could be so metabolically flexible. It's really interesting.
Well, I'm not surprised if any species could be flexible, it would be a cat, right? Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Retrospective. This is Dr. Michael Kent, professor and radiation oncologist at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, and your host. In a previous episode, I had Dr. Jennifer Larsen on to talk about dog food, how to pick, what to feed your dog. It was a great discussion, and I know I learned a lot. So, in addition to my dog and fish, I have 2 cats at home, and I thought it'd be great to have her back to talk about feeding cats, because we all know cats are not dogs. Dr. Larsen, welcome back to our show.
Thanks so much. It's great to be back.
Thank you. So just a recap for those of you not listened to the Feeding Your Dog episode, Dr. Larsen is a clinical professor in nutrition here at the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. She's a board-certified specialist in nutrition and runs an amino acid laboratory here at the school, besides being head of our clinical nutrition service. So maybe I'll ask you this first. Nutritionally, why are cats not like dogs?
Well, cats are special and for a lot of reasons.
I was going to say, I know that.
But most notably, because they evolved as little carnivores. And that's in contrast to dogs, which essentially evolved as scavengers, essentially. They live sort of in approximation with human habitations, etc. Cats evolved as carnivores, and they eat small prey. So they never really had the selection pressure during evolution to build the pathways to make certain nutrients in their bodies. So it's really important that we meet their protein requirements and we make sure that they're getting all the nutrients that they need.
So let me go back to that a little bit. Most people have learned or think of dogs as carnivores.
Yeah.
So
taxonomically, they're carnivores.
Yeah, but what about nutritionally? So how is their selective pressure? Have we changed them from wolves? Are wolves carnivores nutritionally?
Yes, we've absolutely changed dogs. That's part of the domestication process, which is a biological process that has genetic implications that influence everything from the reproductive behavior of dogs, their affiliative behavior with wanting to live with people, their ability to help us with things like herding sheep instead of catching, killing, and eating them. And that influences their nutrition, of course, as well.
So what about with cats? I'd like to think that my cats want to live with me, as much as I know my dog does. I think my cats do. So, how has that difference in their jobs changed and come out nutritionally as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And cats have also been domesticated, but the process hasn't been going on for as long as it has for dogs. And cats have a little bit different jobs. They're really important companions and pets for us, of course, but we haven't sort of made cats that will help us with hunting and retrieving things that we hunt and helping us on farms and those kinds of things.
Unless we think of them as like mousers or
absolutely,
barn cats.
Cats kind of have the same jobs, right?
Yeah.
And cats are also not as diverse among cats as dogs are. So for dogs, we have a huge size diversity and job diversity and personality diversity between a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, for example. Cats are pretty much, or at least much more similar in body size and behavior compared to dogs.
So when I think of cats and I think of dogs, dogs are most of the time going to be eating, out of the dog food, right? That we provide them, whether that's home cooked, whether that's commercial. But cats now, especially if they're outdoor, indoor, sometimes are kind of supplementing their nutrition. They may be eating mice. They may be, unfortunately, eating birds. How does that affect when we're thinking about their nutritional requirements? How does that affect that?
A lot of cats still engage in hunting behavior.
Yeah.
And even for an indoor-only cat, sometimes they're going to be eating little insects in your house or at least killing them.
Yeah, mine seem to catch bugs every once in a while.
Yeah, and that's very fun for them. When a bug gets in the house, it's very exciting because that kind of behavior is very self-rewarding to an animal that evolved that way.
Yeah.
And then I think a lot of people have also had the experience of their cats leaving them portions or whole bodies on their doorstep.
Presents.
Yes.
Doorstep, hopefully not your bed.
Yes. Which apparently means that they just think we are terrible hunters and they're trying to make sure that we survive with their gifts, which is kind of sweet.
I'm a terrible hunter and I'm not going to eat half the mouse. So sorry. That goes beyond my dietary.
You have a line.
Yeah, I have a line. I have many lines. So I know that cats can't make certain amino acids like taurine. Can you go through kind of why an amino acid is important and why they have these nutritional requirements as kind of a species in a sense?
Yeah, cats do require specific nutrients, and they're really sort of well known for their higher than average protein requirements, especially compared to dogs and compared to people. And that's partly because of their evolution as a carnivore and the way that their sort of metabolic machinery works is that they need a constant supply of nitrogen, and they need to have a constant supply of certain essential amino acids that are really important for a wide range of functions in their body. And as I sort of alluded to before, they didn't evolve the ability to make those things because they didn't have the pressure evolutionarily to develop those metabolic pathways because those things were always plentiful in the prey that they were consuming.
Okay. And specifically, maybe you can tell us about the taurine story with cats. Being a requirement and first not being in foods and then being added.
Yeah, taurine is really interesting, and cats' metabolic pathways, I mean, they're very interesting metabolically. They're very...
Cats are very interesting, so it makes sense.
They really very much are. So cats actually have all of the enzymes and metabolic pathways in order to make taurine.
Okay.
But because of the activities of the different enzymes in those pathways and then the alternate pathways, most of the precursor is instead pushed down another metabolic pathway. So they actually don't make taurine to meet their metabolic needs.
So it's kind of like having all the faucets turned on in your house and you're not getting water to the bathroom.
Yes, exactly. That's a good analogy.
Okay. And we need the taurine. Why?
So taurine is an amino acid. And I think most people have sort of heard the expression that amino acids are the building blocks of protein. And while that's true, taurine is a special amino acid because it's actually not used to make protein. It's always available sort of in its free form.
Mm-hmm.
And taurine is really important because it's a small molecule that's important for normal calcium signaling within cells. And muscle cells in particular rely a lot on calcium signaling, especially in the heart. And so taurine deficiency has a lot of different symptoms, including things like poor reproductive performance or degeneration of the retina that's in the back of the eye, and cats can become blind. But one of the more devastating symptoms that we see with taurine deficiency involves the heart muscle. So the clinical syndrome is referred to as dilated cardiomyopathy, or DCM.
Yeah.
And that just means that the heart muscle gets kind of thinned out and the heart is kind of big and baggy compared to normal muscular. Yeah,
it can't really
pump
contract anymore.
The blood the way that it's supposed to.
Yeah. And are there other examples of nutrients that cats are really dependent on that maybe we don't think of as much for dogs, for people even?
Yeah, vitamin A is another good example. So for us and for dogs and some other species, we can eat beta-carotene and other carotenoid compounds, which are essentially just plant pigments. I think most people are aware that colorful vegetables like carrots and sweet potatoes contain beta-carotene. That's what makes them orange.
And yummy.
And yummy. And they can use beta-carotene in order to use that as a source of vitamin A. Cats can't do that, though. And again, they have the enzymes available to do that, but most of the precursors are going to be going somewhere else. So cats really need to eat vitamin A as a preformed form of vitamin A.
So are there certain kinds of food that we would feed a cat that could lead to making sure they get all these nutrients or could lead to deficiencies?
That's a good question. I think that some cats could potentially be fed dog food, and that's inappropriate because they have distinct differences in terms of their nutritional needs compared to dogs.
Yeah.
So while dogs can survive and thrive on cat food, the reverse is not true. Cats should not be fed dog food.
Oh, my cat occasionally grabs one of my dog's kibble, which I'm shocked that he lets her do out of lets him do out of it.
The forbidden fruit, they can't resist.
Yeah. So if we're thinking then about generally what kind of food to feed, do you find that more people want to home cook for their cats, or is that less common?
I think it's highly variable. By far, probably kibble, dry commercial food is still the most common way to feed both cats and dogs.
Yeah.
That's the most economically viable way for most people. It's also a way to meet all of their nutritional needs in a very shelf-stable way that is safe and has been effective for a long period of time. There are some people that are interested in feeding diets that are raw, so either frozen or freeze-dried raw. Canned food is quite popular as well. And some people do want to cook for their cats.
So a couple of questions following up on that. Can I just feed them like salmon or canned tuna or other fish I get at the, at the grocery? Cats love fish, or at least we all think that.
Yeah, those kinds of foods are fine as a treat. But if you wanted to feed that as the sole diet, it's really important that it's balanced. So cats require about 40-ish essential nutrients, and it's really important that those are all present in the diet in adequate amounts and appropriate ratios.
Okay, so if we are going to be feeding canned as their main source, we shouldn't just go get a can of tuna fish and feed that.
Yeah, you should really make sure that you look at the label, and it should be pet food that says that it's complete and balanced for the life stage that your cat is in. So if you have a growing kitten...
Just like dogs we talked about.
Yep. Life stage appropriate balanced diets are important. They have a much shorter lifespan than us, unfortunately. And so it's really important that they have a balanced diet. We can get away with eating an unbalanced diet for much longer than a dog or cat just based on the scale of their lifespan.
And then we were talking about different forms of food. So wet or dry. What's the advantages of each? What's the disadvantages?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, kibble is going to be the most cost-effective option by far. And partly that's related to calorie density. So canned food is going to be usually 3 to 4 times less calorie dense than dry food. Now, that might be an advantage if you have a cat that has a big appetite, because obesity is a huge problem in cats, no pun intended. And obesity has a lot of negative health consequences, and we really want to make sure, ideally, that obesity or unwanted weight gain is prevented. But if it does happen, reversing it is really, really difficult because cats become very thrifty with their calories, and we often need to pretty severely restrict them, which is unpleasant for everybody.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that later, but I wanted to ask you first, what about semi-moist foods?
Those used to be pretty popular.
Yeah.
Right. Currently, probably the most popular form of feeding semi-moist is going to be from treats. So semi-moist are sort of squishy textured treats.
Yeah, not quite dry, not quite wet.
Yeah. Pets find those delicious. They like the texture and the flavor of those. They can dry out pretty quickly, and it's not going to be as cost-effective as kibble.
So you mentioned earlier also about, raw diets, but are most cat foods carbohydrate free, or some carbohydrate free since they're more protein? And I know that's been a fad, at least for dog foods. Has that come up in the cat world?
That has come up a lot in the cat world. People have a lot of concerns about carbohydrates. First of all, we don't have any carbohydrates that have been determined to be nutritionally essential. And the term carbohydrates, just to be clear, that encompasses both indigestible carbohydrates, which would be fiber. And fiber is a really important nutrient, still not essential, but is really important for normal gut health.
Yeah, just like us.
Yeah, of course. And it's not considered essential for people either, even though...
Oh, I thought it was.
We're continually told to eat more fiber. And then digestible carbohydrates would be things like starches and sugars. Now, of course, sugars aren't going to be present in the diets of cats, and they don't tolerate a lot of simple sugars in their diets, as you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
But they actually can digest and absorb starch quite well, and there doesn't seem to be any negative health effects related to that. In fact, cats can adjust their metabolism depending on where most of their calories are coming from, either fats or proteins or carbohydrates. They change what they're oxidizing for energy. So, which is kind of fascinating for an animal that evolved with a pretty strict diet of prey, that they can be so metabolically flexible. It's really interesting.
Well, I'm not surprised if any species could be flexible, it would be a cat, right? But now I know certain times you have to restrict things like protein in a cat. Let's say they have renal disease. So how do we go about still making it palatable? I know, my Labrador, I think he'd eat anything we let him. Cats, not so much.
Yeah, cats do have a reputation for being picky or selective. Really, that relates to their nature as being essentially neophobic, which means that they have a little bit of a suspicion of things that are new. And so we always recommend that when people have kittens or young cats, that they make sure that they expose their cat to a wider range of flavors and textures. Cats generally sort of rely on learning that from their mom and their litter mates, because what they consider to be a safe something to eat is going to be informed by the other animals around them eating those things. And so it's really not that uncommon for a cat to only be fed one form of food or one flavor of food, and then they become quite fixated on that, and they really won't be very adventurous in trying other things. So it's really important that we address that problem. And then if we have to modify the diet to address a certain disease.
Yeah.
So kidney disease is very common, especially in senior cats, and more of our cats are living longer and longer, which is fantastic. We really have to make sure that we are assessing the current diet and what that cat is used to. We also have to look at what the diet looks like in that individual cat, because if you had 10 cats with kidney disease, they're all going to have pretty individual needs. So how advanced it is.
Nutritionally and medically.
Yes, of course. Yeah. So that customized, individualized approach applies to both the medical management and the nutritional management of that disease.
And that's where a veterinary nutritionist comes in.
Yeah, and we leverage fat a lot in those cases because cats do find protein to be very tasty, but fat is really tasty too. And so we can leverage fat not just because it gives us more calories per gram than we get from carbohydrates or from protein, but because it's also palatable. So those diets for kidney disease are often pretty robust in their fat content.
And what do you think about nutritionally? I know I've talked to some owners and their cats have stopped eating because of one disease or another, and they are on a special diet. And then, my advice has always been calories first. If it comes to that, as a nutritionist, what do you think?
That's a really common challenge. There are lots of diseases that will impact appetite, and there's some treatments and medications that are needed that will also impact appetite.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we are using different ways to sort of encourage adequate intake of an appropriate diet. Sometimes that might mean making sure the diet is warmed up, maybe changing the moisture content with warm water or a little bit of broth. Sometimes we recommend changing the site that the animal is fed or the kinds of bowls that are being used. Cats in particular have strong opinions about where they're fed and how they're fed. So, for example, a very narrow, high-walled bowl is not going to be very liked by a lot of cats. They don't like smashing their whiskers into a bowl like that.
They're very sensitive.
Yeah, a flat, wide container is a much better way to feed the cat. And so trying to do the sort of that troubleshooting process in terms of, can we manage some things about the diet that are making the pet not feel well? Like maybe they're dehydrated or they're anemic, and we can address that medically. And then sort of addressing some of the feeding management things. And then finally, we can make some modifications to the diet itself in terms of adding the warm water. Maybe we add some tasty toppers and those kinds of tricks that we have.
Yeah, I've always been amazed at how quick cat food will heat up in the microwave. It's like 5 seconds and you don't want to burn their mouths. You have to be really careful eating food.
It's really important that we make sure we don't have hot spots and those kinds of things. Sometimes I'll recommend people use a warm water bath instead of the microwave, just to avoid that. We really don't want to burn their little mouths.
No, that would be quite bad. So now, as we talk, the other flip side of this is the obese cat that you brought up earlier. So how do you manage that? How do we approach this, especially at, a single cat household, but then I want you to talk about a multi-cat household too.
Yeah, obesity in cats is really common, which is very frustrating. And it happens for lots of different reasons. There's certain risk factors. Some of them are human related and some of them are cat related. And so what I mean by that is that a lot more people are keeping their cats inside more because there's lots of dangers.
My cats are indoor.
Yeah. There's cars, there's coyotes, there's other cats and dogs, infectious diseases.
Hawks.
Yes.
It's a dangerous world out there.
Yeah. But we're getting better, but we're not doing a perfect job with the enrichment of keeping their brains healthy. And that in turn affects their body being healthy. The things that they have to look forward is interactions with you, laying in the sun in front of the window, and feeding time, really.
Yeah, the laser pointer helps a bit too sometimes, right?
Engaging them in chasing things around, maybe throwing toys. Sometimes even have people throw individual treats or kibble down the stairs or down the hallway because cats really like that chase activity. It's very enriching for them. Some people will even have cat running wheels, kind of like we use sometimes for hamsters and such, but they're cat size.
Those.
They're wonderful.
Yeah, for the right cat, right?
Well, in the right household. Not everybody can fit that in their apartment, right?
Fair.
Other things that would potentially increase the risk of unwanted weight gain is the neutering process. Now, making sure that cats are spayed and neutered is something that we've been advocating in veterinary medicine for a long period of time. There's certainly downsides to humans living with both intact females and intact males.
When we first adopted our cats, who recently were neutered, we dealt with a lot of those issues.
Yeah. Cat urine has a distinct odor that is much stronger when they are not neutered.
It does.
And so neutering definitely has impacts on food intake.
Yeah.
And then eventually will have impacts on energy expenditure as weight gain results from that food intake. And from research that has been done on this campus, we know that increased food intake happens very soon, within a couple of days of the neutering procedure. Cats will voluntarily start eating more. So it's really important that owners are aware of that after a neutering procedure, that they might have to, for a lot of cats, decrease the amounts that they were feeding. Mm-hmm. Some of the other human factors might be that a lot of people assume that free feeding their cats is the way that it should go. And a lot of cats do graze throughout the day, and that's sort of the natural pattern of how cats eat.
How my cats eat.
But a lot of cats can't handle that without becoming overweight. And so we still have to make sure that we're feeding them a limited amount throughout the day, even if we're giving it in multiple small meals per day.
So what kind of strategies do you use? Let's say if you have one really skinny cat who grazes and you have one maybe chunky kitty like I have.
That's a very common problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we can use technology to help us. We do have some microchip-enabled feeders that are quite popular and that work quite well in those instances. Sometimes they're little bowls that have like a lid that opens and closes in response to the microchip that the cat has. But you can also use a collar with a microchip in it if your cat is not microchipped. There's also the sort of cat doors, and you can use those cat doors to separate feedings as well. So instead of having a microchip operating feeder, you can have a cat door, either like in a storage bin or maybe a door in your house where only one cat has access to a guest room or a bathroom or something like that. Or you can go the low-tech, low-cost way of just simply teaching your cats how to meal feed and using a bathroom or a bedroom to keep one of the cats in just during the feeding time, and then open the door and everybody has free range the rest of the time when food's not available. It does take a little bit of effort one way or the other.
I did want to jump back, because this is just how my brain works, to one of these fad diets. And I've heard of people feeding their cats vegetarian and trying to. And I get it. If you're vegetarian, you might really not like the smell of meat, or you may not morally want it in your house. Is that possible with a cat, or can you talk to me a little bit about what's out there and what's available?
That's a really good question. We do sometimes have clients that are interested in feeding their cats vegetarian diets, and there are commercial diets that are available that are marketed as cat foods. One of my previous veterinary residents did a study looking at this. This was a study that was funded by the Center for Companion Animal Health.
I do know that, being its director. So, yes.
And Dr. Kanakubo was very interested in veterinary approaches to feeding and in vegetarian diets specifically. And so what we did in that study was we collected all of the vegetarian diets that we could find in the market at that time, and we ended up with 24 diets. Some of them were canine diets, some of them were feline diets, and some of them were marketed for both dogs and cats. And what we did in that study was we looked at the labels and made sure that it had a complete and balanced claim for whatever species it was intended to support. And then we looked at the ingredient lists and whether there were amino acid supplements in there and so forth. Then we took a sample of each of those diets and we analyzed them for the amino acid profile. And what we found was that all of the diets that were marketed for cats or for dogs and cats did not meet the amino acid requirements for cats.
So what would that mean?
Well, that would mean that potentially over the short or long term, depending on how severe the deficiency was, you would expect to see some clinical signs associated with that deficiency. And we only looked at amino acids. We didn't look at all of the 40 essential nutrients, which would include vitamins and minerals. And we had some concerns about those diets and the overall nutritional adequacy. So based on what we found in that study, we don't recommend any vegetarian diets for cats.
So just jumping back to labels, since you just mentioned them, and this just came into my mind. I know when we were talking last time, we were talking about dog food labels, and are they the same as cat food labels as far as what's reported? Is there anything specific we should be looking for on a cat food label, or maybe even just to recap a little bit what you want to look for on a label?
Yeah, dogs and cats diets are going to be regulated the exact same way. So at the state level and at the federal level, the same kind of ingredients are allowed and not allowed. The same kind of things have to be included on the label. So one of the most important parts of the label is often overlooked. People sort of inappropriately focus on things like the ingredient list, which really isn't that informative. What we really want to look for is the nutritional adequacy statement, sometimes referred to as the AFCO statement or the intended use statement. And basically that tells you whether the diet has a complete and balanced claim. And if it does, how the claim was substantiated. And that's either going to be by formulation and comparing the profile of the diet to the nutrient profiles for pet food. And it also tells you the species and life stage that the diet is intended to support. So that's going to be important if you had a growing kitten, for example. You want to make sure that you're feeding a growth-appropriate diet.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe it's my perceptions, but it seems that cats are less marketed to than dogs in a sense. Like we talked last episode about how there's a lot of marketing claims made for dogs, and that often come out as nutritional fads per se. And do you think that's the case for cats, that there's less of it, or am I just not noticing the advertising?
I think that it's shifting. Over the last few years, we have seen a shift from the pet population moving towards smaller dogs and cats.
Mm-hmm.
And more people are living in smaller places potentially, or they want a pet that's a little more manageable or maybe more portable, or maybe they're living in apartments and those kinds of things. And there's a lot more people living in cities than in suburban areas and rurally, probably. So there's definitely a shift. The pet food industry is making more diets in smaller packages, for example.
For dogs and cats.
For dogs and cats. Yeah. And there are people that still want to, get Costco-sized packages of food and so forth. But there's definitely a shift. And I think that the industry in general and veterinary medicine specifically is pretty done with ignoring cats. We still need a lot more research data to support some of the medical treatments and nutritional strategies for cats. They've been historically neglected in terms of the data that we have. But in terms of products and marketing, I think we're really moving into a more cat-centric and well-deserved sort of attention on them.
So the attention could have a flip side too, and I'm going to be a little provocative here, so please bear with me. We're talking about pet food companies, right? I know that many of them support the vet school and nutrition programs, not only here but elsewhere. So does this bias your teaching, your research, what you train people on? Just if I wanted to put it crudely, I'd say, are you in their pocket? And don't take this wrong. I mean, I think it's important that we talk about this stuff.
That's an excellent topic. I think that's something that there should be a lot of transparency around.
Yeah.
The pet food industry and the companies that make pet products, they're really important partners for us in veterinary medicine. And they're really not separate. A lot of our colleagues work for those companies and so
they
forth.
Employ nutritionists.
Of course, yes. Yeah. They employ nutritionists. They employ veterinary medicine specialists and food safety experts and toxicologists, et cetera, agriculture people. And we've had close relationships with several different companies over the sort of lifespan of the veterinary school. They're really important in terms of supporting our educational missions and our clinical missions. They help us improve patient care. They help us improve education of veterinary specialists and of our students. They do give us grants, so their financial support is really important. And of course, also people that are specialists like myself. Sometimes we do speaking at veterinary conferences on behalf of pet food companies that will, arrange it and pay an honorarium, et cetera. And different people might have different experiences, but I can tell you that I have done that multiple times. I have never had a pet food company ask to review and change my slides or tell me what to say in terms of recommending diets or anything like that. In fact, I've had a couple of them tell me, please don't mention brands at all. It's just a disease management talk, which I understand, but most practitioners want some practical advice and they want to know exactly what to feed.
Exactly.
So that makes it really challenging. And there's often going to be more than one product that's going to meet the needs of a specific company.
So what about the grants? Do they give you a grant and you do specific research for them? Or is it, does it direct what research you do? I just want to make sure we explore this.
Yeah, in terms of research, it really depends on exactly what the setting is. So some companies will have an open call for proposals, and sometimes that's going to involve students, and I've been involved in some of those, where you write a proposal and say, this is my research idea for a summer research project for a student or for a resident, and we submit it to the pet food company's scientific advisory board, and they decide whether they're going to fund it or not. And so the parameters of that are very well spelled out. And when that research data gets presented at a conference or published in a paper form, and that's always the goal, is to publish it in a peer-reviewed journal, the support for the company from the company is always disclosed. There has never, in my experience, been an expectation that the company has access to the data. And in fact, they can't. The data belongs to the University of California.
Yeah, or the public if it's, funded federally.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And so we actually wouldn't give them access to the data, and they wouldn't have veto power on whether things get published or not. They're just simply acknowledged as funders of the project. In other instances, we work with them more collaboratively, where maybe we come to them or they come to us and we say, we want to do a clinical trial in patients that have a specific disease using the specific strategy or a specific diet. And we all work together to make that happen. And in those cases, that's very transparent. We decide what the outcome is going to be, who's paying for what, and all of that is upfront. And that's all publicly available information. So nothing is a secret.
Disclosed in the paper.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I kind of want to wrap up by asking you, what's the future for cat nutrition, cat research? Where do you think the questions are not yet answered, and what do we need to do?
Oh, there's so much we need to know. I really do think that some of the data that we can collect about cats at home is going to be critically important. And so,
You mean indoor cats?
yeah, cat owners as our partners in data collection.
Citizen science.
Citizen science, yes. And that might involve technology. So there's definitely some disclosure and ethics. And if we have a camera, for example, on a food bowl, that shouldn't be collecting audio in the household and those kinds of issues. There's some sensitive data collection issues that should be worked.
Privacy issues.
Exactly. But we have like little devices that we can put on cat collars that are essentially accelerometers, essentially like a cat Fitbit or
Activity monitor.
Yeah, an activity monitor that will sort of measure that kind of information. I mean, as you know, when cats come into the veterinary clinic, they're not the same cat that you had at home, right?
They're not at all.
They're a little fearful. Maybe they're loafing in their carrier or on the table.
Depends on the cat. So
Depends on the cat. But we would really like to know what they're doing at home. Are there different types of diets that might influence their activity? Maybe they act differently when they have more or less water in their diet, or if they're on a weight loss plan. So those kinds of sort of partnerships with cat owners, I think, are going to be more and more important as we try to collect more information on cats.
This has been really great. Thank you again for taking the time to join me. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. So thank you, Dr. Larsen.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
It's been great. Thank you.
The Vetrospective, as with life, takes a village. I want to thank those who suggested I start this project and everyone who has encouraged and supported me along the way. Particularly, I want to thank our producer and director, Danae Blythe-Unti, Nancy Bay, who is our program coordinator, our sound mixer, Andy Cowett, and theme music was composed and produced by Tim Gehagen. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.